The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
Tonight, we'll hear a new take on the U.S. War of Independence, where the Americans aren't the heroes of the story, the Brits are. First up, opposition leader Marit Stiles joins John Michael McGrath and yours truly to discuss the first week back for MPPs at Queen's Park. OnPoli is next. JMM, good to see you again,
Hello,
panel.
sir.
There we go.
Have to get around the mics there.
Yeah, a little tricky. I guess a little program note off the top here. We have been having more guests in our little set here over the last few weeks. We had Bonnie Crombie in, the Liberal leader, a while ago. We had Mike Schreiner, the Green leader, last week. We got Marit Stiles, the NDP leader, official opposition leader today. Next week, because it's the fall economic statement, the Minister of Finance, Peter Bethlen-Falvey, will be here on set with us. So, yeah, that's nice.
Yeah,
nice to have some folks in.
We didn't have a lot of guests in the previous season here, and so if our viewers and listeners want to let us know about whether they like having the guests or whether they prefer just to have the two of us gabbing, we will give you the email address at the bottom of the episode, as we always do. Let us know how you feel about it.
Yeah, this is a democracy. We like people to vote and tell us what they think.
Yeah, we like audience participation.
There we go. And with that, let's get out to issue one. After 5 months of not sitting, the Ontario legislature was back in business this week as MPPs gathered at Queen's Park to once again do the public's business. And as often is the case with this government, municipal rather than provincial issues dominated the headlines. Okay, JMM, once again, we are talking about cyclists versus motorists because the government has now unveiled its so-called anti-bike lane legislation. I don't know what else you want to call it. I guess it's got an official name.
It does. The Reducing Gridlock Saving You Time Act
there we go.
is the name of the new bill that will require municipalities to seek the approval of the Minister of Transportation for any new bike lanes they install. The minister has also announced that the province is going to pay the cost for removing existing bike lanes that fail to meet the new requirements that the government is imposing.
Can I make a churlish little point this, because I know we're going to talk about this, and I know where you're coming from on this. When provinces tell municipalities what they have to do, but they're prepared to pay for those, I like that.
Yes.
When provinces mandate municipalities to do things and then say, now you find the money in your own budgets to do these things we want you to do,
yes,
I think that's more intolerable. So shall we start by giving them credit for saying, we want you to do this and we'll pay for it?
Yes, I think that is preferable to the alternative.
Yeah.
And municipalities having no constitutional status, there is no requirement for the Ford government to even put money on the table. Yeah. Whether that is money well spent is another issue.
Okay, so the taking out the bike lanes and the province being prepared to pay for them is part of the bill.
Yes.
What else is in the bill?
Most of the bill is actually dedicated to making it easier for things like the proposed Highway 413 and other provincial priority highways to sail through various provincial approval processes, including environmental assessments. An interesting little potential wrench in the gears here is that the Professional Engineers Government of Ontario Union is proposing to have kind of a labor action where they would have their members basically stop participating in any of the planning and engineering work that needs to go into these highways. Obviously, this is the government has made no secret that these are among its top priorities going forward. And if the engineers start withdrawing their services, if I withdraw my services from TVO, like you can find another podcaster, engineers are a legally protected profession.
I will never find anybody to replace you. It's impossible.
That's very sweet of you.
Please do not work to rule.
But you cannot just find other engineers like that. That is a protected profession. So this potentially has some very serious consequences for the government.
Let me circle back to the 413 because this government has been relentless in saying that it wants to get shovels in the ground and get the 413 highway going. That's the new east-west highway that would be north of the 407. This potential job action by the engineers, what did you call it? A wrench in the gears? That's
yes,
pretty good cyclist metaphor there. This government's done everything it can to try to get irritants for this project that they want desperately out of the way, right? They made a deal with the feds for the feds not to have an environmental assessment, which was their legal authority to do so, and they are not doing that. We know all the opposition parties at Queen's Park say if they win the next election, they're going to come in and cancel the 413. That's what they say. So clearly this government wants to get going fast on this thing so that we're past the point of no return and you can't cancel it.
Right. And I mean, if they want a spring election, I'm not sure it's just going to be physically possible to do enough work that you couldn't plausibly cancel the project. But I think this is partly about signaling by Doug Ford and the PC party, in short, which side they are on, right? I don't think everybody who drives a car necessarily like self-identifies as like a capital M motorist, but there are people who do, and Doug Ford is telling them in, big, bold, flashing letters, I am on your side, not the side of the cyclists, right? And I think the 413 is part of that. This move against bike lanes is part of that. It's not terribly good congestion policy. And I can't drop this topic without I'm going to give you some numbers here. There are over 1,000 kilometers of arterial roads in the city of Toronto. There are another 700 kilometers of collector roads. The Premier is talking about reversing a few dozen kilometers of bike lanes at the most. Even if you grant the argument that bike lanes reduce traffic throughput, which I don't, but I'm going to set that aside, this is not a serious congestion policy. This is like homeopathy for street design.
And with that, we're off to issue 2. The province has announced that former federal health minister Dr. Jane Philpott, now the head of Queen's University's Medical School, will chair the new Primary Care Action Team. The team's mission is to figure out how to solve the family doc crisis in this province, which currently has 2.5 million Ontarians without a GP. What's Dr. Philpott supposed to do here?
The goal is to connect every person in Ontario who does not currently have a primary care physician with a primary care, either a physician or a team, within the next 5 years. They are planning to implement a team-based approach to primary care using publicly funded doctors, nurses, and specialists to alleviate the administrative burden on healthcare workers. Right, lots of people have family doctors. That might be the go-to image they think of as primary care, but a lot of family doctors these days saying they simply cannot afford to continue their practices in the way they have been, in part because of that administrative burden of being a sole practitioner in Ontario.
Right. I remember actually sitting on the set right over there talking to Dr. Philpott several months ago. She had just written a book as she came in for an interview, and at that time she said, I am prepared to work with anybody if it means trying to make some progress on the family doc healthcare crisis in this province. And so she is obviously taking her own advice. I'm not sure anybody saw this appointment coming, though. This is really different. Having said that, as impressed as the leader of the Ontario Liberal Party, Bonnie Crombie, is with Dr. Jane Philpott's talents, she has said publicly she's not completely sold on this arrangement. How come?
The overarching concern here is that the Ford government will give Philpott the assignment, will wait for her to produce a report of recommendations. You can imagine the timeline here would be that any substantive report would come after the next election, so that this is in part an effort to defuse any accusations that the government is going to face about healthcare policy. Oh, well, I know things are tough, but we're going to wait for Philpott to make a report back to us. And then once the report is eventually returned to the government, they will not act on the recommendations. And
that's the fear.
That's the fear. And, we can go through a few examples where this has happened in the past, right? One close to my heart, the Housing Affordability Task Force issued a very substantive report about ways that the government could get more privately built housing made in Ontario. The government did act on some of the recommendations, but the biggest and most effective ones were also the most contentious ones. They have largely been ignored. The government's Blue Ribbon panel on post-secondary education largely ignored. That report said that the sector needed, I forget what the number was, the $1 billion bailout.
Absolutely.
The government did not come to the table with that much money. we can go back to COVID, where the government had a very contentious relationship with scientific advisors and eventually disbanded the scientific advisory panel. And even more recently, I think of the Chief Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Kieran Moore, has made recommendations like raising the drinking age to 21. Obviously, this government is choosing to go a different direction on the availability of alcohol in public.
A non-starter for anybody between the ages of 19 and 21.
Yes,
sure
indeed.
You that too. And with that, we're off to our interview with the leader of the official opposition. The NDP, of course, has formed government only once in Ontario history, in 1990 under Premier Bob Rae. But New Democrats feel they've got some wind in their sails these days. They have formed the official opposition in the last 2 consecutive elections, and that's never happened before in the party's history. They're also setting fundraising records. So we thought we'd get the party's leader, Marit Stiles, in here to hear more about her plans for her party and the province. Good to have you back here.
It's great to be here.
Pleasure to see you. JMM, fire away.
Let's start with something from the current events. Should Queen's Park be telling municipalities where and if they can put bike lanes in their streets?
Ooh. What was the premier's line on this yesterday? Nasty bike lanes.
Nasty bike lanes, yes.
I think I'm going to go, by the way, in Halloween. That's definitely going to be my costume. No question. I don't think that it is the province's role to be, I would say, like meddling in these issues in that way. I think the province has some pretty big issues that we should be addressing as a province that we're not. And so, I understand. Look, Doug Ford, he lost this battle at City Council. He wants to fight it out here again. And I know that there are also challenges, right? Congestion, gridlock challenges. But what I would like to see the provincial government doing is delivering on some of the, like, for example, transit that they're supposed to be building. So, when the Premier went after this bike lanes issue in the legislature this week, it was in response to one of my questions about when we're going to see the Eglinton LRT open. What's the date? Let's go. Instead of answering that question, he talks about bike lanes. So I think it's a bit of a distraction, clearly. And the unfortunate part, I think, is that if we see a big move of cyclists, many people are cycling these days in the GTA. Many people are doing it because it's more affordable for them as well. And I'm very concerned about, what it's going to mean once we have all of those road users back in the same lane again. So I'm concerned. I don't think it's helpful. And I'm hoping that, and honestly, we haven't actually seen what his plan is for this.
Well, if you think about the political calculation behind this, though, he's presumably prepared to give up the cycling vote, quote unquote, of people who live, closer to downtowns. And he'll take the inner suburbs, he'll take the 905, he'll take the exurbs, and that's what he needs to win. So if you look at the political calculation here, is it not bad on his part?
Well, you know what? I mean, and I actually happen to believe that really that shouldn't be the only consideration. Call me crazy. I think we should be making decisions based on evidence. Policy should be based on evidence and certainly empathy. And I'm concerned that this is the game that he continues to play. I think that he's refusing to actually address the issues that Ontarians are actually really concerned about. So yes, this is certainly on some people's minds without question. But I think there are bigger issues that people are really struggling with.
Well, one of them's healthcare, and you brought that up this past week, so let's start with that. He's hired Jane Philpott, the former Liberal federal health minister, to come up with a 5-year plan, basically to get everybody a family doc. Your view on that appointment?
Well, as I said, I have a lot of respect for Dr. Philpott. I met with her recently, actually just earlier this year at Queen's University, and I wanted to talk to her about, her book that she put out and some of her thoughts about how we address the family doctor shortage in Ontario. I think she has some good ideas. I'm concerned, I will say, that this is a government that has so far not tended to listen to experts, even their own experts. So I hope it works. I hope she does offer something because, look, at the end of the day, we have to start solving these problems. Ontarians, 2.5 million Ontarians without a family doctor right now. That number is going to almost double in the next couple of years. It is a crisis already. It was a crisis 10 years ago, but now, we are really in a deep crisis. And so I'm hopeful that she can help us figure a way out of this. But I have to say, I don't, this government has had almost 7 years now to address this issue, and they have failed. Things have continued to get worse, so I don't have a lot of confidence in the government to make anything positive happen here.
Do you think it is harmful to you or to the Liberals, given that you fish in the same waters for a lot of voters, for the government to take a potential star Liberal candidate off the board with an appointment like this?
Well, look, I don't know what the Liberals conversations they were having with Dr. Philpott. I've heard some rumors too. I don't know if she has, I can't speak for Dr. Philpott, if she had any kind of political ambition in that regard. I mean, she's obviously run before and been elected and had that office.
And was open to running again. She was open about that.
She was open to running again. I think that what I do know about her is that she does want to make a difference. And so however she makes that difference, some people it's running and it's being elected and it's the role that we're playing. And others it's maybe a little more behind the scenes, working on the policy at the civil service level and moving that forward. And I think she's shown that she has a real commitment to this. So I will, you won't hear me say a bad word about her at all. I wish her all the best. I am very skeptical about what this government's actual interest is in solving this problem. I am one of those people who really, I have to say, I look at the opportunities they've had to address this and to address other issues in our healthcare system, like the hallway healthcare crisis. And I wonder if they really want to fix it at all, or if their whole plan has been to sort of allow it to crumble and replace it with private clinics and privatization. And I suspect that is definitely part of the plan. So we'll see if they manage to solve this problem. It is, without a question, I will say, one of the number one issues that people talk to me about when I'm traveling around the province of Ontario in every community, the fact that people can't find a family physician.
I mean, do you worry at all that it's window dressing for, you talked about the privatization.
Yeah.
Obviously, you have a very critical view of the healthcare policy this government has implemented. Do you worry that this appointment will be a way for Doug Ford or others in his government to say, like, whoa, don't be so alarmist. Look, we've got Jane Philpott here. How bad could we be?
It's possible. I was raising, I think that is part of their thinking, possibly. But look, I've always said, too, if we can actually get things moving in a positive direction, great. If she can be part of that solution, fantastic. I've asked the minister, and the premier all week in the legislature this week, questions about the hallway healthcare crisis, the lack of doctors. As you know, there's a crisis right now in supplies for people in home care. It's really awful. And they actually just stood up and said, things are really better than they've ever been before. That literally is what the premier said to me. And I just shook my head. How can anybody in that government actually argue that things are better today than they were? And I will say, in healthcare, the crisis was real 6 years ago, too. He was elected to fix the hallway healthcare crisis. We remember that. And now it's about twice as bad as it was. So we have not seen solutions either from the previous Liberal government or this current Conservative government.
Switching tracks slightly, 3 of the current New Democrat MPPs in the legislature are opting not to run again. Some are moving to federal politics.
They're all moving to federal politics.
Sorry, they're all moving to federal politics.
Yes, trying to.
Yes,
That's right. Yeah.
Seeking nominations. How pissed are you at them?
No, I'm really not. Honestly, I'm not. Look, first of all, I was thinking about this issue recently because, for me, when I think about why I ran to be an MPP, you got to, and people ask me this all the time, like, they're thinking about running. I say, you got to find that passion, that thing you actually want to change. Because this is some tough times when you're elected. And so you better know what you're in it for. And I think that if my colleagues see an issue that they want to, something they really want to move and change at the federal level, all power to them. I really do. And I think that's very common, right, for a lot of us to spend some time at the provincial level and then think, what, I'd like to see if I can make this kind of change at the federal level. And I think it's great. They've been excellent MPPs, all three of them, fantastic representatives. These are all ridings that we have held in a very strong way and have history in. And I am hearing about candidates that are interested in running in each of them. And I feel very confident that we'll be able to continue to represent those communities at the provincial level as well.
I'm so proud of you. You actually cussed in that question.
Well,
I wasn't sure you were going to do it.
We'll see if I get bleeped or not.
Yeah, no, I'm kind of proud of you. Okay, the setup for my next question is politics and life are not fair. Here we go. NDP governments out west seem to get elected, NDP options seem to get elected as government on semi-regular basis. They've got a decent reputation for balancing budgets and spending within their means. The NDP, for whatever reason, for good or ill, does not have that reputation in Ontario, and as we said at the beginning, has only won once in the last 157 years. How important is fiscal prudence to you on your list of priorities?
I think it's actually, for me, it's a fiscal prudence, fiscal responsibility is something I take very seriously. I think that I see the role that I have now as the leader of the opposition and as an MPP as an enormous privilege. And in government, I believe that it is, we are spending the people's money. We are making decisions that will have enormous impact on the people of Ontario and future generations. And I take all of that responsibility very seriously. And I think when you look at, and I look to NDP governments in other jurisdictions, particularly in the West, and how fiscally prudent, as you said, they have been. I mean, Tommy Douglas was a fantastic example of this. And so that is kind of where my politics, I think personally, are rooted. And I have to say, I don't think our reputation is a fair one by any means. I mean, I look at the way that this government is spending money and frankly wasting the taxpayers' dollars. It's extraordinary to me that they think that they can, frankly, spend their way out of things, and they're doing it in such an ineffective way. They're throwing money at schemes which end up being scandals instead of actually investing in smart ways that are going to directly affect people's lives and make life better for people. And I'll say one other thing, which is. When I first came to this province from Newfoundland in the 90s, this was the economic powerhouse of Canada. It is no longer. You and I have talked about this, Steve. We are a have-not province. The Premier of BC recently, unfortunately, reminded me of this. And it was sobering. This is not the Ontario that I moved to, and I think it means that we are having a very difficult time competing with other provinces and other jurisdictions. And so in terms of the future of this province and what we can offer future generations, I think we have to address the fact that we are not building the province that people want to come to. And that means we have to take seriously also the social infrastructure of this province.
You've talked about expenditures and building. So the government has really made building Ontario part of its mantra going into a prospective election in the next year. Let's talk about some of those projects, and I'll get your take on them. Would you, if it is underway, would you complete or continue Highway 413?
Well, I mean, if they get it started, which I'm very skeptical about, it is interesting to me that this is a government that will, can pull, remove all kinds of regulations and just, go that extra mile to do things like this, but can't build housing. I think if it's up to me, whether that starts or not, I do not understand why this government hasn't moved on some obvious immediate solutions to congestion and gridlock. We have raised on numerous occasions and put it to the floor in the House in a motion that the government should move freight trucks over to the 407, make it free. My goodness, use the wildly underutilized 407 and hugely expensive 407 to remove some of the congestion on the 401. So I don't understand their obsession with the 413, to be honest. I think there are better, more immediate solutions. I also would rather see them focus on some of the bigger transit projects that I think would move more people more effectively. But I guess we'll see how far down the road, literally, they've gotten with this project by the time we replace them as government.
Well, that's the question. Very confident. By the time we replace them as government. Okay. That raises a bunch more questions. For example, they want to move the Science Center to the waterfront. If that Science Center is already in the process of being built by the time you take over, but isn't completed, do you complete it or do you shut it down and go back to Don Mills?
I mean, it's such a nightmare, right? Because like I was just saying, the legislature, the Science Center, just earlier this year when I was at the Science Center, it was bustling with school field trips. There were, all kinds of science experiments happening and wonderful projects and exhibits. It was very well utilized. And then what did the government do? They just shut it down, and now they're moving, into these like pop-ups, basically in
the Sherway Gardens
in the
or
Sherway,
something.
And this is an outrageous, I think, deceit as well, that they didn't tell the people of Ontario what they were really going to do here and when they were going to do it.
But if it's half built, are you really not going to finish it?
I mean, I think you'll have to look at what the alternatives are for that space, because look, they bulldozed the whole of Ontario place now, right? So, I mean, it's dreadful what's happening. But I do think that what we have at the Science Center is a building that is a really important structure. It's in a really important place for a lot of underserved communities with, frankly, a lot of children as well. And so I would want to see it reopen at that location. Absolutely. What they do down at Therma is a whole other story. I mean, because to me, this whole moving the Science Center was clearly just the Premier's way of padding the Therma project. And so, that is not good planning. It's not fair to the people of Ontario. But this is what we see again and again with this government.
You've anticipated what's next on our
Yeah,
list.
exactly. She's not reading the script, right?
No, I can't see it.
But you mentioned the spa. We've talked on the podcast before about the lease seems to be structured to make it very difficult to break the lease to get out of this potential spa deal. But would you look at either breaking the lease or some other measure to get out of this spa plan for Ontario Place?
Absolutely, 100%. I mean, look, and by the way, this is a government that hasn't had trouble tearing up contracts. They've done that at enormous expense to Ontarians.
$225 million for brewers.
Yeah, exactly. And so, also they could get, beer in corner stores a year early, right? Come on. So I would absolutely, and we have been looking at that lease. We pushed for almost 2 years to have that lease released. It's just come out. It's a great deal for Therma. It is a great deal for Therma. It is a terrible deal for the people of Ontario. And so we are absolutely going to look at any opportunities we have to get out of that lease. I think there would probably be money involved, but I think at the end of the day, if you look at what it's going to cost Ontarians, it's a terrible deal. So something has to change.
Back to politics here. This last question for me, and I guess I want to set this up by saying you and I, a few weeks back, we did a Q&A at the Empire Club of Canada, and I asked you this question on that occasion, so the people in that room know your answer, but the people who watch and listen to this podcast do not. So I want to do this again. We've had 43 elections in the province of Ontario, and Liberals and Conservatives have won 41 of 43. For whatever reason, there are a lot of people out there, maybe some watching this, who when they think, I want to replace this government, do not think with the New Democratic Party of Ontario. What can you say to them? And of course, in the election campaign, you'll be more specific, I'm sure. But as a general statement, what would you say to them right now to get them to even consider you guys as an option?
Well, I would say, first of all, why not? Why not the NDP, right? We have been putting forward proposals. We are not just an effective opposition, we are an effective opposition. But I think also we have excellent ideas, and we have shown that we are willing, I think we have great integrity, and we have been very accountable to the people. I would say to the people of Ontario, and it's funny because Doug Ford kind of started to say this week as well, but look at the last 6 years under Doug Ford and the Conservatives. Is your life any better today? I can guarantee you there's only a few people who will say, yes, my life is better. And most of them have a deal going with the government. Most people, life is not better today. People are having a difficult time. They're struggling to afford rent. people feel stuck in so many respects. They're unable to plan for the future. And so I would say to people, you're going to be looking at the next election. My life isn't any better. Why would I reelect this government? But then I want you to go a step further back and think, how did we get here? And I look at education, healthcare, housing, consecutive liberal and conservative governments over the last 30-odd years have made decision after decision that got us to this place that we are in, this moment we are in right now. And we have a different vision for the province. I think we are a party that wants to create opportunity, that knows how to get things done, and I think they should give us a try. And I'll tell you something else. I mean, I do think they need to get to know me, certainly, and that is a challenge I have because I'm a new leader. But as they get to know me, I think they'll learn that I actually have a lot to contribute, that our caucus has enormous experience. We represent ridings in every corner of this province, which nobody else can really say. And I think that we have the team that can really can start to bring Ontario back to being the economic powerhouse that it once was.
One of my questions that I keep sort of bubbling around, you mentioned, having representatives in every corner of the province. Yeah. You are a Toronto MPP. Mm-hmm. Doug Ford is a Toronto MPP. Mm-hmm. Bonnie Crombie, not yet an MPP, but will seek a seat in Mississauga. Yeah. Mike Schreiner's admittedly a Guelph MPP, but really constrained politics around the GTA. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering, and I think about this with, the Premier of Ontario currently fixated about bike lanes in Toronto.
What does he call it? The great state of Etobicoke, I think is what he said. He does, yeah.
And when you travel around the province, I mean, what do you hear from people about the centrality of Toronto in provincial politics?
Absolutely. Well, you know what? I do. And it's interesting because I was actually talking to my partner about this the other day. I think I come at this from a pretty unique perspective, actually, because I grew up outside of, not just outside of Toronto, but outside of Ontario.
Not even on the 401 at all.
I mean, we're on the 401.
You're not even on the mainland.
No, I wasn't even on the mainland. And so I think I have I understand that, I always have, that sense that people have that it's always Toronto. Toronto always gets everything. And that you can't understand what my life is like if you haven't, if you live in Toronto and you're from that background. And I'm very proud of my community. I love living where I live. I've raised my children in Davenport. But, I know what it's like to feel isolated, to live in a rural community. I know what it's like to see all those politicians pay all that attention and all those jobs and opportunities go to that city. And I think that Ontarians do need to hear a different perspective. I mean, I like I said, I have a huge amount of time. I love the city I live in, and I feel very proud of it. But I think that we have to have a plan that doesn't leave all of those other communities out. And I say that, and I think especially of Northern Ontario right now, because things are just really bad. I was at the Meet the Miners event last night and talking to mining company representatives. And when I asked one of the companies out of Kirkland Lake, I said, what is the one thing that you think the provincial government should be doing right now to support your sector? And the first thing they said to me was, we need doctors in Northern Ontario. And then the second thing was, we need childcare. We have women who want to work in our mines and in these jobs, and we can't keep them because we don't have childcare. We can't keep families here because we don't have doctors. So again, it's that, like I said this at the beginning, I think, of this conversation. It's the social infrastructure that they've forgotten. And we are not going to be able to do all of the great things that we want to do as a province, to take advantage of the opportunities that we have and create jobs and build back that future, if we're not thinking about that, because we are going to rely on those resources. So what does that look like? Does the government even have a plan? And I can tell you what, they do not. So that worries me. I think it's a very short-sighted view, and I don't think we're going to be able to take advantage of this moment if we don't act quickly.
On that note, that's our time. Marit Stiles, we're grateful you came into TVO tonight and had this conversation with us, and we look forward to doing it again.
Thank you. Next time, I'm definitely going to wear one of my T-shirts.
Okay. Good. You're on.
Okay. All right.
a lot.
Thank you so much for having me.
Let us go to the mailbag.
Indeed. If you've got a burning question or insightful comment, please send it to us at onpolitics@tvo.org. JMM, what's up this week?
This is an email from Ignacio Ropolo. I hope I pronounced your name correctly, Ignacio, who says, I really enjoyed your interview with Mike Schreiner. Steve and John Michael asked him some great questions, except I wish you would have asked Mike to talk about amalgamating the public and Catholic school systems in light of the $145,000 trip by the Brant Haldeman Norfolk Catholic District School Board trustees. The Green Party is the only party that has that in their platform, but it seems even the Green Party has been rather silent on the issue lately. A study a few years ago estimated the cost savings would be around $1.6 billion. Perhaps you can do a segment on this issue. Cheers.
Ignacio, thank you for that letter. First, a little background for those who haven't followed this story. This school board in question wanted to purchase some statues and sculptures for their schools, but they wanted to see what they were purchasing for their money. So they spent $45,000 traveling to Italy to see that which they were considering purchasing. And the Minister of Education, Jill Dunlop, did not think that was a particularly wise expenditure of public funds. She launched an investigation. Meanwhile, the trustees have paid back the money to try to get out from underneath this issue.
Controversy.
Let's just call it that. Yeah, controversy. Okay. To Ignacio's bigger question, should this prompt a revisiting of the unifying school governance into one single public school system policy rather than having, as we do right now, a public school governance system, a Catholic school governance system, a French school governance system? Okay, Ignacio, I hate to disappoint you, but here's the truth. While the Green Party did once campaign on merging the school boards together, and incidentally in the election, and it was a few ago that they did this, they doubled their vote. They didn't get any more seats, but they did double their vote. This is actually not technically part of the Green Party platform anymore.
Was not in the last election.
It was not. No, I remember asking Mike Schreiner about this, and he said, no, it's not part of our thing anymore. We're trying to lower the heat on education reform. So technically, none of the four parties represented in the legislature with seats at Queen's Park today have unifying school governance as part of their platforms. That's just the reality.
If you'd like to ask about the content of the show, do please remember you can always email us at onpolitics@tvo.org.
And that is the On Poly podcast for this Friday, October 25th, 2024.
You can follow our show on Apple Podcasts so that you get notified each time a new episode is available. And you can see the video version of the podcast on the TVO Today YouTube channel.
Until next Friday, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
For 2.5 centuries, the American Revolutionary War has provided endless amounts of subject matter for authors and historians. And most of what we read casts the American rebels as the good guys and the subjects loyal to King George III as the bad guys. So it was with considerable interest that I read James Arnett's latest book. It's called The Monmouth Manifesto, which very much turns those tables and introduces us to characters in that war in a very different way. And James Arnett joins us here in studio. Great to have you here.
Thank you.
We should just establish off the top a little bit about your background here, because you're a guy who was sort of a corporate lawyer, corporate CEO for how many years?
30, 40.
Okay, and then sort of late in life you decided, I think I'm going to try my hand at being an author. We had you here before for your previous book, and now here you are again. You've come out with a second book.
I have.
What fascinated you about this story so much you wanted to spend your life writing about it?
Well, in a sense, for the reason that you gave, I mean, it reverses the normal story about the American Revolution. And of course, as Canadians, we always hear from the Americans all the time about their great revolution, which it was, and how the patriots were the good guys and everybody else were the bad guys. And this just flips the script. So that kind of interested me. And of course, the loyalists, a lot of them became refugees to Canada, as you know. And had an influence, at least in the 19th century, on Canada and the way it developed. I don't go into that aspect in the book, but you know, if you follow these characters and you read this book, you get a sense of the kinds of people that were loyalists and why they were the way they were.
Well, it's interesting. You've written it as a novel, but the characters are real and the incidents are real. The events are real.
Absolutely.
And how did you, I mean, I guess you're stuck in a library somewhere for years and years trying to figure out all the ins and outs?
Steve, the incredible thing is I basically did this. I started this during the pandemic. Mm-hmm. I did this all my research online. It was unbelievable.
You can find everything there.
You can find everything. And, and you come up with one fact, and then you see a footnote, and you follow that through to another one. It was extraordinary. And then, of course, that would lead me into books, or footnotes would lead me to books. And then I'd get in touch with Amazon and order the book. I must have bought 50 or 60 books along the way.
Just for researching this one?
Yeah.
Wow, okay. As you think about your own views and how they either did or didn't evolve as you were working on this, I'm guessing there must have been a point where you put yourself in the time and you thought to yourself, if I were living in America at the time, would I have been with King George III or would I have been part of the rebels trying to create this new country? Where'd you come down on that?
I didn't, exactly. I mean, I sympathized with the characters, the loyalists, who are the protagonists in this book. But on the other hand, they were on the losing side of history. Generally speaking, not a good place to be. So a bit of this and a bit of that, to be honest.
One of the protagonists is a guy from the so-called founding family of New Jersey. His name is Richard Lippincott. And at some point, he is forced, I guess by the rebels, to swear an oath to his state of New Jersey rather than the king of the United Kingdom, which would be he's the guy he likes. What do you think of this requirement to swear oaths? Because we see this in your book. We see it through a lot of society today.
Well, first of all, I mean, one of the reasons he didn't swear the oath was he was a Quaker. And Quakers didn't swear oaths to anybody. In fact, it was almost like one of their key tenets. But on top of that, he wasn't about to swear an oath to the Patriot cause because he was a loyalist. I don't have a problem with swearing oaths if it's to the right person. I have a good friend, I won't name him. If he's watching this, he'll know who it is, who says, he's a lawyer. He said, if he'd been asked to be a judge or something, he would never have sworn an oath to King Charles because
that's it.
Because he is sort of Republican. And I said to him, well, it's just an oath. So it depends. It depends whether you're really taking it seriously or not.
Okay. The War of Independence starts very badly for the United States, as you tell in the book. George Washington, who's, of course, the general leading the rebel side, he's on the run, but suddenly he wins a couple of battles and the tide turns.
Yeah.
How did that actually happen?
Well, I think how that happened was that,
because they were well on their way to losing.
And it's a fundamental aspect of the American Revolution and of this story. The British, frankly, did a half-assed job, if I can put it that way. And at that time, at the start of it, the British general was a guy called General William Howe, and he was really of two minds, I think, about whether it was a wise thing to try and defeat this rebellion. So, he inexplicably, in a way, but unless you buy that line of thinking, he allowed Washington to get away a couple of times, and he didn't pursue him when Washington was at his weakest. And I think there was a certain British colonial arrogance there too.
Well, if I remember my reading of the book, General Howe, you write, was too busy screwing around having affairs to beat Washington at Valley Forge. Otherwise, the thing may have turned out differently. Now, you say that in the book. Is that true?
That is true.
Okay, so that might have had something to do with it.
That might have had something to do with it. Yeah, it's true. He spent a winter in Philadelphia. Washington was close by at Valley Forge, and the Americans always talk about this terrible winter when Washington was in Valley Forge, and he didn't have enough troops, and it was a terrible winter. And Howe was in Philadelphia, having conquered Philadelphia, which was then the main city, and he was luxuriating with his mistress and drinking too much, that kind of thing.
Got it. You certainly convey an impression in the book that the decision to create the United States of America, which of course all of us have been taught in elementary and high school, was a virtually unanimous thing and everybody couldn't wait to get rid of the Brits. You really don't portray it that way. You really portray it as something that, you know, people were very mixed in their views about that. Now, is that accurate?
That's absolutely accurate. I mean, I think the general feeling is, if you read the history, you know, maybe 1/3 of the people were for it, maybe 1/3 were against it, and the 1/3 in the middle were just, you know, not thinking much about it. And what happened there, and it usually happens with revolutions if you think about it, if you get a small core of people that really want to make it happen, most people are kind of apathetic. If you get a small group of revolutionaries who want to make it happen, same thing happened in Russia. It's amazing that they can make it happen.
Yeah. And these guys did.
And these guys did.
Yeah. What were the loyalists, those loyal to King George III, what were they fighting for?
You know, I think that they were fighting for no change. I think they thought, you know, we've got a pretty good way of life going, and you know, sort of a romantic idea about the empire. A lot of them, I mean, most of them, I mean, they identified themselves as British subjects still. They were almost not yet Americans. And so, you know, the authority figures in their lives were, you know, the Crown, the Anglican Church, and the colonial officials who ran things. And another aspect of it would be that they didn't like the idea of these guys who were rebelling. A lot of them tended to be fiery people. They might have seen them as lower class people. There would be that fear too.
Gotcha. Another very famous American, obviously, is Benjamin Franklin, who was a guy who was one of the leaders of the Revolution. His son William had a bit of a different view. What was his view?
Well, he was a committed loyalist. That's quite an incredible story, and it's not a main part of the book, but it's certainly part of the book. William Franklin, when the rebellion started, he was the crown-appointed governor of the province of New Jersey.
Loyal to the king.
Loyal to the king.
And his dad was a revolutionary.
Well, his father by then was, but his father had only recently turned. His father had been a loyal Brit until he ran into some trouble in London with the crown, and then he switched, and he became a revolutionary, and he assumed that his son would follow his lead.
And he didn't.
And he didn't.
What happened to their relationship?
It was absolutely fractured. And basically, Benjamin Franklin was quite a wealthy guy. He disinherited William Franklin.
Here's a quote from the book. A loyalist to the king was convicted by a jury of treason against the state of Delaware for providing intelligence and stolen arms to other loyalists, and the punishment was reported as this: you must be hanged by the neck, but not till you are dead, for you must be cut down alive, then your bowels must be taken out and burnt before your face, then your head must be severed from your body, and your body divided into 4 quarters, and these must be at the disposal of the supreme authority of the state. Now that's pretty barbaric stuff. Did this really happen?
Well, it didn't really happen then. It was still the legal punishment for treason. If you go back 100 years earlier to what happened in the civil wars in England, that's the way the rebels were treated. But by the time of the American Revolution, it was still the legal punishment. But generally speaking, they were much more genteel, and they just hanged them.
We should explain the title of the book. The Monmouth Manifesto is actually what?
The Monmouth Manifesto was a statement, a message, a manifesto that a bunch of patriots in the county of Monmouth in New Jersey sent to General Washington. Because what had happened was that a patriot had been hanged by the Loyalists. And not only had he been hanged, but his body had been left hanging, on a tree for all good patriots to see what happened to people who messed around with the Loyalists. So the Loyalists were not very happy, and they were demanding that retribution. And so they sent a manifesto to George Washington, who was the general, the head of the army, demanding that he arrange one way or another for there to be retribution.
There is evidence in our province today to remember some of the Loyalists in this war. And I note that there are 3 streets in the Toronto area named Lippincott, after Richard Lippincott, who's the protagonist of the book. There's another street named Borden, after Esther. It's kind of amazing that all that evidence is still here. What'd you think of that?
Well, it is kind of amazing. The reason it happened, Steve, is that Richard Lippincott and his wife Esther Borden, they had several children, but only one of them survived to maturity, and it was a woman. And she married when Richard Lippincott, he ended up in what's now called Toronto, in York. Mm-hmm. And his only daughter married a guy in Toronto named George Taylor Denison. And the Denison family in the early 19th century anyway were quite prominent in Toronto. And they were big landowners in Toronto. And so they developed various areas of downtown Toronto, and they ensured that the name of Lippincott and the name of Borden was affixed to some of those streets as it was developed.
Are there any of their ancestors left?
Oh, yeah.
There are, still in the city.
Oh, my wife is one.
No kidding. Okay. Well, okay. Well, that's all right. There we go. Did you know that before starting all this?
I wish I hadn't said that, Steve.
Okay.
Okay.
I did not know that.
There are lots of descendants of the Denisons in this city and around the country. That's what happens. As it happens, my wife, who's from Winnipeg, as am I, was a descendant. And what had happened was I had actually heard from her family the barest outline about the story about Lippincott. That's how I got onto it in the first place. I hasten to add, it's not why I wrote the book, but it's how I knew the story. And if I can add one thing there, so I'd heard a little bit about this thing about Lippincott. When I read up about him, I found out, oh boy, there's a real story here, because it's mentioned in biographies of George Washington and in stories about the histories of the American Revolution, some of this stuff. But what happened was I stumbled on the fact that there was another New Jersey farmer, as was Lippincott, who became a Loyalist, who ended up in Canada, whose name was James Moody. And James Moody, actually, his biography is written up in the Dictionary of Canadian.
Yeah, he's better known.
But what happened was, so I was trying to decide, was there enough to make a novel out of this? Then I thought, well, I've got these 2 guys, but how do I do that? It's amazing. I absolutely stumbled on the fact that Lippincott and Moody overlapped in the New Jersey Volunteers, which was a Loyalist unit, a Loyalist regiment, actually, in the British Army. And then I thought, oh boy, I've got these 2 guys. I've got their 2 lines of story. I'll put them together and pretend that they're buddies.
Very good. That's very cool. Well, since you mentioned the family connection, I guess it's a bit of a tradition on this program, since we had you here last time when we did this, to just sort of find out what's going on in your family, because your daughter Tanis used to work here.
Yeah.
She's okay these days?
She's okay.
All right. Good to know.
There's a funny little story there that I probably shouldn't tell you on TV either, but in any event.
No, well, if you've set it up like that, you have to tell.
I have to.
Yeah.
As it happens, and we don't need to go into how it happened, but as it happens, a few years ago, I think just before the pandemic, my daughter Tanis found herself at dinner with the George H.W. Bushes in Kennebunkport. When I heard about this, I said, Tanis, why didn't you tell President Bush that you're related? Because the Bush family are also Lippincott descendants.
Come on.
No kidding.
Boy, everything connects. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Now, I'm trying to remember his name now. You got another kid, Will or something like that. Did he ever amount to anything?
He's doing all right.
Just all right.
He's doing all right, Steve. Yeah, I mean, you may or may not have seen in his podcast, Smartless.
Smartless.
Yeah, Smartless.
Yeah, I've heard of it.
And they
got a couple other guys on that too.
Well, yeah, but they had the 4 presidents on.
Yeah, that's right. I heard that episode.
And there's a picture of them together with Will and the 4 presidents and the other guys on Smartless. And the way the picture's set up is that Will's in the middle of the picture. And as it happens, he's the biggest guy in the picture. And he's got his arm around Joe Biden. So it's a little bit like a picture of Will Arnett and his buddies.
Give Tanis our love.
Thank you.
Yes. I used to call her MNBF, my new best friend.
Okay,
that was our nickname for each other. And for those of you who love American history, this is a really different take, and you will enjoy James Arnett's latest, the Monmouth Manifesto, and we're glad it's brought you back here to TVO for this chat.
Thank you so much, Steve.
And that is the agenda for Friday, October 25th, 2024. Monday on the program, we look at the multiple dilemmas facing Ontario's post-secondary institutions. I'm Steve Paikin. Thanks for watching TVO, for joining us online at tvo.org. Have a great weekend, everybody, and we'll see you again on Monday.